Hey everyone, this is Friedel Hakaraja Raven. I'm here with my recap and review of the Gilded Age season number 1, episode number 8, which is the penultimate episode for season number 1, and it's titled Tucked Up in New York. And I enjoyed this episode, especially the ending, featuring Mrs. Russell and what she went through. And also, we got to learn more about Peggy's past, which I think it was handled well. And I really liked the decision that Peggy made, but we'll get to it in a bit. So the episode opens up with Mr. Russell. He's talking to Claire. He's talking to his lawyers, and basically, his team still hasn't found anything in order to help him with the case involving Mr. Dixon, and we get to reveal about that as well in this episode. And I'm actually I like the fact that they didn't drag it too out and ended it on a cliffhanger during the finale. So Mr. Dixon thing ends up being handled in this particular episode. But yeah, this is where they're like, you know what, Mr. Russell, you have to go for a hearing, and then if the judge is against you, then you'll have to go for trial. And yeah, Mr. Russell is worried. Of course, he's worried because he has a lot of plans. He has a family to worry about. He has a reputation to worry about, and he just wants something that can help clear his name. So, cutting to Mrs. Russell, and Mrs. Russell is basically trying to ignore what Mr. Russell is going through. I mean, in the sense, she isn't necessarily completely ignoring it. She knows that Mr. Russell is in trouble, but Bertha is trying to do what she needs to do in order to maintain appearances. So this is where she is like, you know what, we will be going to Newport for 10 days, and when we come back, then Gladys will have her ball, and she ends up telling her help that. They need to they need to have everything prepared once they come back, and Gladys's dress has already been selected and whatnot. And Gladys is like, Mom, don't you want to listen to what I would like to wear? And Bertha is like, nonsense, don't worry about it. They have your fittings, your dress has already been selected. Then we cut to Oscar and John, and they're basically having a lunch. And yeah, Oscar is getting ready to go to Newport because Larry told him that Gladys will be there too. And of course, Oscar wants to get back with Gladys. He wants to marry her and whatnot. And John is feeling a particular way about it, which I understand because John is clearly in love with Oscar. And the fact that John actually said that he's in love with Oscar in such a public setting back then, I was like, wow. John really loves Oscar. And in a sense, if you ask me, I think Oscar loves John too. But Oscar is trying to be realistic about their predicament because Oscar is like, you know what, John, I don't have enough money to keep living the life that I want to live. And also the fact that we are going to grow older. And when men grow older in the society, and if they aren't married off, then there are rumors, people start to think, and I can't have that tarnish my reputation, John. So I'm trying to do what I think is best for both of us. Because in my opinion, I think that Oscar wants to marry Gladys and he wants to keep hooking up with John because, again, as I said, I think Oscar loves John too. He's not ready to let go of either one of these options that he has in life. And yeah, Oscar is like, you know what, whatever. We need to do this, John. We need to do this, and I need you to understand. Then we have this entire thing with John, and wait, both of them are called John, or is his name John? This is John Adams, right? And his name is Jack, or is his name John too? I think his name is John too. I could be wrong. But anyway, we have this entire thing with John, and he's mysteriously disappearing off to somewhere with flowers in hand. And of course, Bridget notices it. And Bridget is very, very interested in learning what John is up to. And yeah, we actually get to see what he is up to in this episode. Then we cut to Oscar and Marian because Oscar is getting ready to ride with Larry to Newport, and Marian is like, well, I'll walk you to the house. And she goes there and they meet Larry, and Larry is like, yeah, we'll be staying with Mrs. Fish and we'll be in Newport for 10 days. And while they're talking, this is where Miss Ainsley comes in, and Miss Ainsley is like, Mr. Larry, I have these important papers that I want you to give to your dad because he needs to read them. And Larry is like, yeah, I'll make sure that he gets them. And Marian basically this scene was here to establish that Marian has seen Miss Ainsley and she knows who she is. So as everyone is getting ready to leave, Oscar goes to the carriage, and Marian talks to Larry about how Oscar has eyes for Gladys, and Larry is like, yep, I know Oscar is a very persistent suitor, but he also needs to get through my mom, so let's see how it all works out. Miriam comes back and Aurora is already there. She just came like a minute ago, and Aurora is going to Newport as well. And I'm like, so, okay, so no one invited Miriam to Newport? Oh, come on now. And of course, Aunt Agnes is like, why is everyone going to Newport? Larry is going, Oscar's going, the Russells are going, Mrs. Russell will be there. Why aren't they going to this? She ends up talking about a particular place that I can't remember. And basically, Newport is the new thing now, and everyone wants to go there. So as everyone is getting ready for luncheon, we get to see Bannister come. It's tea, not luncheon. My bad. Tea. Bannister comes in, and Bannister is like, "Tea. The tea is going to be prepared, so be ready." And this is where Aunt Agnes, because she's still not talking to Bannister, she's like, "Bannister, why? Ada, tell Bannister to ask Jack for some tips." John or Jack, again, I'm confused by the name, but yeah, John for some tips. And yeah, I just want this entire thing to be resolved already. Like, how long can Aunt Agnes hold a grudge? Then we cut to Aurora talking to Marian, and Aurora basically, in the previous episode, we saw that Aurora wasn't happy seeing Russell being all friendly with other young women, and Marian doesn't necessarily know about that. And Aurora, trying to be a good friend, she wants to warn Marian about Russell and how he's being very friendly with other young women. And Marian is like, "Oh, don't worry about it, Miss Fane. I know that Mr. Russell was with you during that Edison party, the lighting party, and whatnot." And Aurora is like, "Well, I just wanted to warn you so that you would be ready." And Marian is like, no, there's nothing for me to worry about. I know Mr. Russell. And Aurora is like, okay, I just did my duty. And I appreciated what Aurora did for Marian. She's trying to look out for her. Then we have a surprise appearance, and Mr. Rakes comes into the house from the back door, and he has this letter that he wants to be delivered to Miss Peggy Scott, and he asks Bridget to do it, but Mrs. Armstrong comes in. Mrs. Armstrong is like, no, I'll take it. I'm already going upstairs. And yeah, she takes it, and of course, you know that she's going to read the letter. And I'm like, okay, so Mr. Rakes isn't going to ask for Marian? Okay. And actually, I was surprised that Mr. Rakes. That Mr. Rakes wasn't going to Newport. I actually thought that he was going to go to Newport, but no, he didn't. So Marian decides to go and talk to Peggy, and Marian is like, "You know what, Peggy? I think I've decided what I want to tell Mr. Rakes." And Peggy is like, "Okay, spill it out." And Marian is like, "Well, I'm going to say yes to marrying him because we both know that Aunt Agnes isn't going to approve of Tom Rakes, but maybe after we get married, maybe she'll have no other choice but to approve of us." And Peggy is like, "You know what? You go, girl. You do what you want to do in the name of love and whatnot." So as these two are talking, this is where Mrs. Armstrong comes in, and Mrs. Armstrong's like, "Well, Mr. Rakes came in with the letter," and Marian thinks that the letter is for her, but Mrs. Armstrong is like, "No, it's for Peggy. It's for Peggy." And yeah, Marian actually thought that the letter was a sign of a good omen for her decision to marry Mr. Rakes. So we got to the Russell's house, and Gary Astor is there, other young people are there, and they're basically doing rehearsals for the dance for Gladys's ball. And Mrs. Russell is like, "You know what, I'll be giving all of you new outfits, I'll be paying for them, and of course that makes everyone happy." And yeah, Mrs. Russell is very excited about the upcoming ball. Then we cut to John coming back, and yeah, the help asks John what he was up to, and John is like, "Wouldn't you like to know? I just go somewhere for fun." And yeah, they realize that John is keeping a secret because John is like, "You know what, Mr. Bannister, I'll be up in my room, so if you want anything, please knock." And he walks away, and this is where Bridget is like, "Well, he's keeping secrets, I can tell." And Mrs. Armstrong looks at Peggy, and she's like, "Oh, wouldn't you know, Miss Scott?" So yeah, Peggy has her suspicions. She's suspicious of Mrs. Armstrong, and she's like, yep, this old woman ended up reading my letter, huh? So we got to Mr. Russell, and Mr. Russell is like, "Well, the family is going to Newport, but I'll need to stay back and handle this trial thing." And Clay is like, "You know what? So that means that Mrs. Russell won't be at the hearing." And Mr. Russell is, no, she won't be, but she is worried about what that might mean for Gladys's ball and our reputation. And Clay is like, "You know what? She'll survive. So Peggy ends up sharing her suspicions with Marian, and she's like, "You know what? I think that Mrs. Armstrong ended up reading my letter because there was a very small tear in it." And Marian is like, "Oh, okay, but what was in the letter? Can you tell me?" And Peggy is like, "Well, it wasn't good news, I'll tell you that." And then Ada comes in, and Ada is like, what are you two talking about?" And Marian is like, "Well, Peggy thinks that Mrs. Armstrong ended up reading a letter of hers. And Ada's like, you know what? She's sly enough to do that. And Ada ends up sharing that she wasn't a fan of Mrs. Armstrong. She has never been a fan of Mrs. Armstrong. And Marian is like, you know what, Aunt Ada, them's fighting words. And Ada is like, I know. So we cut to Bannister, and he goes over to the Russell's house, and he ends up talking to Church and Mrs. Bruce. And he's like, okay, so I found out that Miss Turner was fired, and she's no more. She is not working here anymore. And then he ends up talking about he basically ends up warning Mr. Church about something that he'll have to worry about down the line. He's being very mysterious about it, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Mr. Bannister has planned, because again, we don't necessarily know who ended up telling Mrs. Aunt Ada, or not Ada, Agnes, Aunt Agnes about Bannister working for the Russells that day, right? We don't know. Maybe it was Mrs. Bruce. Who knows? But anyway, as these three are talking, they end up noticing Mr. Boudoir having an argument with a woman. We don't know who this woman is. And I guess we'll end up finding out in the finale, or maybe season number 2. Who knows? And then as far as Mr. Watson's story is concerned, we know that Mr. Watson goes on these walks and he ends up looking at this woman from afar. And yeah, the woman is like, you know what, I'm tired. I have seen this man before. And she ends up sending one of her footmen to ask the man to come here. And Mr. Watson walks up to her and she's like, okay, so can I help you with something? And Mr. Watson's like, you don't remember me? You don't recognize me? And she's like, do I need to? And this is where he ends up telling her his name, Clarency or something. And she's like, oh. And she ends up going into the house. So maybe he's her father or brother. I'm not really sure. So Marian ends up going to Rakes' office, and she's like, Mr. Rakes, let's get married. Let's do this. And Mr. Rakes is like, really? We should get married? And she's like, yep. And also, I'm a bit hesitant because I don't want to be an anchor around your neck. And Rakes is like, well, it will be a very beautiful anchor around a very beautiful, willing neck. And I'm like, okay. Again, I'm still not really sure about Rakes' intentions. I'm not really sure where he wants to go with this entire marriage thing. Are they going to get married in the finale? I have no idea. So, Mr. Church, Watson, and Mrs. Bruce asks Mr. Boudoir about what he was arguing with, whom he was arguing with in the morning, and Mr. Boudoir is like, yeah, I'm a bit upset, and they're like, are you going to share the information with us? And he's like, no, I won't, so bye-bye. Then we cut to Newport, and everyone is basically having fun. Walder is here, and they're basically talking about how Mrs. Astor ended up buying a house in Newport, and it's all the rage. A whole lot of rich families in New York are buying up properties in Newport and whatnot. And then this is where Gladys is like, okay, so how's life here? What do you do here? And basically the young people go to the casino to play tennis, and Mrs. Russell is like, yeah, let's go there. We might end up meeting Larry there. So while that's happening, we cut back to New York, and Marian goes into the store, and she ends up noticing Miss Aisley walking out, and she, I guess, bought new gloves, and Marian wants to talk to her, but she is not quick enough, and Miss Aisley basically ignores Marian, and she walks out of the store. And while that's happening, it turns out that Miss Aisley ended up leaving her checkbook or something, I guess it's a checkbook, or maybe a record or something, and she left it behind. And the assistant tries to call out to her, but Miss Ainsley has already left the shop, and Marian's like, oh, don't worry about it, I know her. And the assistant is like, you know Mrs. Dixon. And I'm like, oh. And of course Marian doesn't know what this actually means. And Marian's like, no, I know her employer, and I'll give the book to the employer. And yeah, this is where things get a bit more interesting, because Marian decides to go to the Russell house. She hands the book to Church. Mr. Russell walks in, and she's like, oh, this book belongs to Mrs. Dixon. And Russell's like, Mrs. Dixon? Who are you talking about? And she's like, well, I ended up meeting her when she came to give these papers to Larry. And she's like, oh, you mean Miss Ainsley? And Marian is like, yeah, Miss Ainsley. She was in the store. She forgot the book, and I have now returned it. And Mr. Russell was like, So yeah, he ended up putting 2 and 2 together. And we get to see how all of the information comes in to help him later down in the line during the trial. Not the trial, my bad, the hearing. So, of course, Bridget is still into figuring out where Jack walks off to, and she's like, I need to go. I need to figure out where he's going with these flowers. And, of course, Mrs. Bauer is like, I think that you're just jealous. I think that you want his attention now that you think that he's giving his attention to another young lady. And Bridget is like, it's not like that. And Mrs. Bauer is like, but she's like, I need to go. And Mrs. Bauer is like, you know what, you can go, so go. So Mrs. Bauer ends up going to Aunt Ada and Marian, and Aunt Ada is doing her sewing, and Marian is like painting a picture. And yeah, Mrs. Bauer came in to give Aunt Ada the dollar that she owes her every week. And before she leaves, this is where she's like, you know what? I feel that Mrs. Armstrong is planning something against Miss Peggy Scott. So Ada is like, you know what? That sounds like her. And she asks Marian to warn Peggy about Mrs. Armstrong planning something against her. And yeah, this is where we get an entire backstory involving Peggy. And I think there were fans. I was included in those fans too. There were fans who ended up having this theory that Peggy was once married and she might have had a child as well. And that's exactly what's revealed in this particular episode. So it turns out that the man that Peggy fell in love with, Elias, they both ended up getting married, and Peggy ended up getting pregnant, and her father found out. And of course, Peggy's father didn't approve of Elias because he was uneducated, he didn't have any prospects, and he ended up forcing Elias to announce it in the paper that he was married already. So his first fake marriage ended up making his marriage with Peggy void. And yeah, and it turns out that Peggy lost a child as well, and she's been trying to find out where the midwife is, and that's why she was in the same area where she ended up meeting Marian, and that's why she also ended up asking Mr. Rakes for help. And yeah, Mr. Rakes' letter was basically telling Peggy that he couldn't figure out where the midwife was either. And yeah, again, the fact that Peggy ended up bearing a son, I have a feeling that the son is still alive out there. I could be wrong, but I think that's what's happening here. And Marian ends up feeling very, very sad for Peggy, which is understandable. And she's like, you know what, Peggy, this is your story. This is your story. You need to tell your story to Aunt Agnes yourself before Mrs. Armstrong says something. And Peggy is like, but how will Aunt Agnes react to this information? And Marian is like, we won't find out until it's time. So I need you to go and tell my aunt about everything. And yeah, it's a very, very unfortunate situation, especially the fact that it was basically caused by Peggy's father. So now we know that why Peggy and her father aren't basically on the best terms. They're trying to mend the relationship, but at this point, I think it's going to still take a lot of time for the relationship to be mended. Maybe, just maybe, Peggy's father knows where the child is and he's basically keeping an eye on him. Who knows? Giving some funds or something to the family that's taking care of the child. Again, I have no idea. So we cut to Mrs. Russell talking to Mrs. Fish at the club because the young kids are playing tennis, and she's like, oh, Mrs. Russell, nice to see you here. Why couldn't Mr. Russell come in? I've heard that he was facing trouble due to the railway attack and accident. And Mrs. Russell is like, oh, no, he's not in any trouble. He's just not here because he has all of these meetings he couldn't walk away from and whatnot. And Mrs. Fish is like, So the tennis game is over. I think Oscar ended up winning, and Oscar was playing along with Gladys against Larry. So Oscar and Gladys won, and as they're talking about playing tennis, this is where John decides to walk in, and Oscar is like, what the heck are you doing here? And John is like, well, I just came here. I'm living with this particular family and whatnot. I'm just here for fun and whatnot. And of course, Mrs. Fish knows John, I guess. And everyone makes their introductions, and Mrs. Fish is like, you know what, John, I would like to invite you for dinner. Wouldn't you say yes? And John is like, yeah, I'll be delighted. And Oscar decides to talk to John, and he's like, John, again, what are you doing here? And John is like, well, I'm just here to have a good day. And he walks away to help Gladys with the tennis rackets, and Oscar is like, he's basically speechless. And I'm like, you know what, Oscar, he's your boo. You love him. Let him do what he wants to do, because again, you need to understand where John is coming from. He doesn't want to lose Oscar. He has his concerns, but I think that John is going to end up liking Gladys, and I think he'll be okay with Oscar marrying Gladys, but who knows. But yeah, as far as Gladys is concerned, I do feel sorry for her, because this isn't fair to Gladys, the way that Oscar is trying to use her. So we got to the hearing, and yeah, Miss Ainsley has been called to the hearing as well. And Miss Ainsley thinks that it has something to do it's something important to do with Mr. Russell because he wants certain papers and whatnot. But when she walks in, she's basically called out, and Miss Ainsley is like, "What the heck is happening?" So she ends up being questioned about using Mr. Dixon's name and the book that she left at the store and whatnot. Now I have to say that I don't necessarily understand everything that happened during this particular scene, but I'm going to try and share my thoughts when it comes to what I could understand. Now, I could be wrong, but from what I could understand, it's the fact that Miss Ainsley knew what Mr. Dixon was up to, and she ended up hiding the note, which basically had Mr. Dixon stealing money from Mr. Russell. Again, I'm not really sure. And then when it comes to the charge account that Miss Ainsley has been using, Mr. Dixon stands up and he's like, shut up, stop talking. So you know that these two were in cahoots. They have been working together in order to steal money from Mr. Russell, and Mr. Russell is not a happy man right now. So after the hearing is done and the judge clears Mr. Russell's name, Mrs. Russell's name, Miss Ainsley and Mr. Dixon will be asked to come to court again in order to answer for their crimes. And before Mr. Russell leaves, Ainsley is like, "Mr. Russell, I'm so sorry. I wish I'd never done this to you." And Mr. Russell is like, "You know what? It's a little too late now, Miss Ainsley, and you won't be working for me again. However, I'm of course, because Mr. Russell is the type of man who likes to have his revenge. He's like, you know what, Mrs. Ainsley, you can go and search for a job anywhere else, but whenever you search for a new job, I'll contact your employers and I'll share your past history with them." And basically he threatens her, and he's like, "You know what, from now on you will never ever be able to get a well-paying job. You could end up surviving by cleaning floors and whatnot, but yeah, that's it for you." And Miss Ainsley is like, "Oh, Mr. Russell, you don't mean that, do you?" And Mr. Russell is like, "Yeah, I mean it." Again, I'm like, Miss Ainsley, what the heck were you expecting going up against Mr. Russell? So cutting to John and Bridget, this is where we find out that John has been making visits to his mother's grave. Basically, he visits every week during the month of his mother's birthday, and he ends up sharing his past with Bridget. And he was 9 when his mom ended up being burned to death with her sister and the sister's child. And yeah, it's a very, very sad affair. And then I guess when he was 13 or 14, his father died. And John has brothers, but they aren't necessarily in contact with each other. So yeah, I like the fact that these two ended up bonding, because John has his own trauma and Bridget has her own trauma with because of her father, which we don't necessarily know a lot about. But yeah, I liked seeing these two becoming friends before they actually become a romantic couple moving forward. And maybe they'll never become a romantic couple. Who knows? Maybe they'll just stay good friends. I'll be here for that too. So everyone is at dinner, and you can see Gladys talking to John, and this is where Miss Astor, she's after looking at Mrs. Russell and how she's talking, and she ends up telling Larry that, you know what, your mother's is very gay. And I'm like, But of course, the meaning of the word gay was different during that time. And Larry is like, yeah, she's very happy because she ended up hearing something from Dad that everything is going well. And yeah, basically the conversation moves on to Mrs. Fish basically warming up to Mrs. Russell and saying that Mrs. Russell is very tenacious, which of course Bertha ends up taking as a compliment and whatnot. So while John and Gladys are talking, because Gladys is like, "You're a very, very clever man, huh?" Oscar is of course looking at those two, and Oscar, he just doesn't want John stepping in and ruining his plans. So let's see where all of this leads to. And Bertha is like, "Your friend John is very friendly when it comes to young women, huh?" And Oscar is like, "Yeah, that's the type of guy that he is. But we have to keep a close eye on Gladys, right?" And Bertha is like, "Well, not too close, because that's my job." So we got to Carrie Astor, and she's like, "Mom, why aren't you warming up to the Russells? Why are you being unkind to her?" And Carrie Astor is like, "You know what? I am not being unkind. I am a leader, and sometimes when you're a leader, you have to be unkind." It's basically that Mrs. Russell came from nowhere. Her husband isn't any good either, so I can't just invite them into my social circles. And Carrie is like, "Come on, Mom, just do it." And maybe she'll do it in the finale. Who knows? So we got to downstairs, and this is where Bannister is like, Miss Peggy, you wanted to talk to to Aunt Agnes, and it's convenient for you to go up there. And Marian and Ada are there as well, and Mrs. Armstrong, you need to go up there after 10 minutes. And Armstrong is like, oh. So basically, we have the scene where Peggy ends up sharing her story with Aunt Agnes, and of course, Aunt Agnes is very, very understandable about Peggy's situation, and yeah, she feels sorry for Peggy and she wants to support her. And then Mrs. Armstrong comes in. So basically, we find out that after reading Peggy's letter and basically making up an entire story, Mrs. Armstrong had told Aunt Agnes that Peggy ended up giving birth to an illegitimate child out of wedlock, and then she abandoned that child and whatnot. And Mrs. Armstrong is like, well, I was looking out for the family. And Agnes is like, well, I'm doing that now too as well, you know. So yeah, Aunt Agnes is like, you know what, Peggy, I understand you because I have lost children as well. So I understand the burden and the emotional weight that you're going through. And Ada's like, yeah, of course, you lost children too. But before she can say anything to Agnes, Agnes is like, you know what? Now I have to figure out what the heck I need to do with Armstrong. But yeah, basically, it turns out that Peggy is like, you know what? I appreciate all of the kindness that you have offered me through by also giving me a job and allowing me to stay in this house. But I think that I need to leave. And Ada and Agnes and Marian, of course, don't want Peggy to leave. But Peggy is like, no, I think that I need to leave because I just can't continue to stay here especially with how Armstrong acts in front of me. So yeah, it's time for Peggy to go, and I'm like, Peggy, no. I just hope that she is not written out of the show. I don't think that's what Julian Fellows is going to do, but let's see. So Peggy goes away to pack up her stuff, and Marian sits down with her aunts, and yeah, Marian is like, shouldn't you have fired Mrs. Armstrong? And Agnes is like, you know what, I can't live without Armstrong at this age because then I'll need to hire a new maid and teach her everything. And yeah, it's too much trouble. And also, yeah, Peggy has made her decision, even though I would like her to reconsider her decision. And Miriam's like, you know what, it's all good. It's time for all of us to open a new chapter in our lives. And Ada's like, well, you sound very final about it. So basically, I think Ada senses that Marian is going to do something. So it's time for Peggy to catch the last ferry, and Agnes goes to talk to Peggy, and she's like, Peggy, a whole lot of people aren't going to give you the respect that you deserve or basically acknowledge your skills and talent. And even though I want you to stay here, I also know that you need to do this on your own. You need to start a new chapter, and I bid you good luck. You are a very strong woman. And Peggy is like, yeah, I will always cherish my time here with you guys, but I need to go. I need to go. Personally, I really like the fact that Peggy ended up making the decision on her own because she isn't helpless. If you think about it, Peggy isn't a helpless character. She's skilled, she has talent, she comes from a good family. So I really like the fact that she was like, you know what, this is kind of a toxic workplace because of Mrs. Armstrong. So I can't live here, so I need to go. So bye-bye. I'll find something new to do in my life. So we got to Mrs. Russell and everyone, and they're basically talking about the house that Mrs. Astor bought, and for $200,000. And Mrs. Russell is like, you know what? I would like to see this house because I want to see what $200,000 can buy you here. Walter is like, you know what? Let's go. And she's like, really? Right now? And he's like, yeah, she isn't here, so let's go. It will be a secret. And Gladys stays behind, and Walter, Berta, and Aurora Finn decide to go to Miss Astor's house. And then we cut to Marian, and basically she's going to stay with her parents' house, and her mom is like, you know what, you are young, you still have a life ahead of you, so I want to know that you'll be okay. And basically her mom wants her to find a young man again and get married and start a family again. And Marian is like, you know what, you kind of remind me of Mrs. Van Ryan. But anyway, I'll continue to stay with you guys, and I'll also continue to write for the Globe. And her mom is like, well, that could make your father angry. And Peggy is like, you know what, it is what it is. If he's angry because of me still wanting to write for the Globe, then let him be angry, and I can always move out, huh? And yeah, Peggy's mom is like, no, don't move out. So we got to Alistair taking Berta and Aurora to Miss Astor's house in Newport, and he ends up meeting the butler. Apparently, he's a legendary butler, and Alistair ends up paying him, bribing him to keep his mouth shut when it comes to Mrs. Russell being here. And yeah, they go in, and Alistair is giving them basically a tour of the first floor, sharing the place's history. And as they are talking, Mrs. Russell arrives. Not Mrs. Russell, my bad. Miss Astor arrives. Yeah, she arrives, and of course the butler runs in, and he's like, Miss Astor is here. Miss Astor is here. And Alistair is like, should we go? And he's like, no. She has already seen your carriage. She knows that you are here with Aurora Fane, so we need to figure out what to do with Bertha. And Alistair is like, yep, get rid of Bertha. And poor Bertha, she's she's taken out of the house from the back door, and I'm like, oh no. Poor Bertha. And yeah, she comes outside of the house, and she ends up looking at the help, who is basically preparing dinner, smoking a cigarette and whatnot, cleaning carpets. And yeah, she maintains her composure, and she starts walking away with her head held high. And I'm like, oh, this was so embarrassing. But it is what it is. So we have the finale next week, and in the finale, of course, we're going to get to see Gladys's ball. So that's going to be interesting. And of course, I'm not really sure if Marian and Rikes are going to get married in the finale. Who knows? But yeah, let me know what you thought of the episode down in the comment section below. And until next time, stay happy, stay safe, stay blessed. See you guys later.